Hi, and welcome to the Child Care Aware of Minnesota update for Tuesday, April 1st. This is for action that took place from Monday, March 24th through Thursday, March 27th. The legislature has been out for a couple of days in celebration of Eid, so they will be coming back on this week. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently since there was so much going on this week. I'm going to group this into categories for you. And then many of the things we will probably go more into detail in the next couple of updates. And we'll be doing a written update to catch you up on the many things that will be transpiring. So first of all, during the week of March 24th, there were a couple of information sessions in the House. The Oversight, Fraud and Prevention or Fraud Prevention Committee this time did get an overview of the governor's anti-fraud package, which for our purposes includes some of the changes to child care assistance that would bring us into compliance with the new federal rule. In the Senate, they heard the same presentation that was done last week in the House, which is an update from the Department of Human Services on the licensing regulation modernization efforts. So those were informational in nature, but started updating the members on action. Most of the governor's or agency department bills were heard last week. A couple will be heard this coming week. And as I'd mentioned before, this Friday, April 4th, is the deadline for any bill to be heard and continue to be on the table, if you will. So I won't go into detail in what's in these bills. We'll save that for next time. If you want to go back, the very first update that we posted back in January does include an overview of the governor's budget proposal. So that's what most of these bills are. But just as a way of orienting you to that, when you look at the bill tracker, there are two at least types of bills, sometimes three for each department. Most of the things that we work on in our world are in now the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. So there is a DCYF budget bill, and like it sounds, those would be things that require funds. And then there is a DCYF policy bill. Those tend to be things that don't require funds, but are changes to statute or new additions. And then in the case of DCYF, there is also this year a technical bill. Most of that deals with the fact that there's still some tweaks that need to be made to statute to bring everything into alignment to make it fit with the new department. If you recall, that's still a bit of a work in progress, and there's still some changes that need to be made. So we'll be looking at the department bills for Department of Children, Youth, and Families, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Department of Human Services, those roll together, Department of Education, and then there is the Office of Inspector General's own bill, and this year there's a policy bill that touches on some childcare things. So just to know those are all in play, they will all be heard by the end of April 4th, and we'll go into those in more detail next time. What I want to spend the rest of our time on today, though, are some of the member-supported bills, because some of those do deal with new topics that we haven't talked about. And instead of doing them by committee this week, I'm doing them by topic. And then I'll indicate. In most cases where they've been heard is the Children and Families Committee in the House or the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate. So the first would be some funding requests. In the House this week, the House Children and Families heard House File 1002, which is the request for additional Head Start funding that was heard last week in the Senate. They also heard House File 994, which is additional funding for the Parent Child Plus program. And they heard House File 1660, which is a request from Representative Frazier, which would put forward a needs assessment for out-of-school and youth programming. So all of those were laid over for consideration in the House and the Children and Families Committee, and all revolve around funding requests, either for new approaches like the youth study or sustaining either Head Start or Parent and Child Plus. Under technology requirements, this has been a pretty big issue this session. I've reported before that Representative West has really made one of his, if not his top priority, one of his top priorities to deal with this question of video monitoring for a couple of different reasons in a couple of different ways. So this week, the bill he's sponsoring that would require the use of video cameras to monitor infants and toddlers was heard, and this would be only in centers. There was an amendment that got to a little bit more specificity and dealt with some of the concerns about cost and some of the concerns about the number of days that the video footage would need to be stored, more information on written policies, that kind of thing. This is House File 1915. Representative West, and it not only got heard in the House Children and Families Committee, but it did get heard in the Judiciary Committee and referred back to Children and Families. So as you can imagine, this one has a lot of conversation and a lot of really difficult stories to listen to about children who have been harmed, and also a lot of concerns from our child care community around cost, access, concerns about video footage getting into the wrong hands. So I think it's a work in progress, but definitely continues to move. Also in the Judiciary Committee, two other bills that I reported on last week, also both carried by Representative West, did get heard and sent back to committee. And Judiciary, they need to always look at anything that has to do with data privacy or data access. So that's why these bills make a stop over there and come back. So House File 1916, which is also Representative West's bill. This time it is dealing with cameras, but this was more along the lines of fraud production prevention. So it would be only in centers that take $1 million or more of CCAP or early learning scholarship money, and would be specific to keeping cameras on places where parents are signing in their children and other kind of entrance points, basically under the premise that some of the fraud issues have revolved around people claiming they came to care and did not. And then the last one that was heard in Judiciary, I reported it on last week, House File 2226, also Representative West. That was the bill that would do a better job, hopefully, of connecting up some of the data sets. This was in response to a situation where the Bureau of Criminal Affairs had data on a particular person of interest and could not share that with the Department of Human Services background checks, and ended up with a situation where someone was hired that should not have been, and turned out to have a pornography charge. So those bills made it to Judiciary, and they'll be coming back to the Children and Families Committee here probably this next week or as part of the omnibus process. Finally, two more categories, just broad changes to licensure, childcare licensure. Again, Representative West, he's been busy. House File 2305. And this was a very specific change to how a maltreatment investigation is posted, and specifically gets at the question of who reported it. So was it self-reported or reported otherwise? All in the same service of trying to better protect children based on experiences he and other families have had. And then Senate File 1629 was heard in the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. And this would be an expansion of what is currently in statute for a legally non-licensed provider. So right now you can take your own children and one unrelated family's children and still be under the threshold for licensure. This would expand that to letting a legally non-licensed provider take children from up to two families. So some discussion to be had there about what that might do to the licensing system and the licensed family childcare community. Finally, probably the biggest conversation this week that took place besides the technology bills was after the updates on the licensing modernization work. There have been a couple of bills so far in the Senate, and I think likely coming to the House. Actually, there was one in the House, sorry. And these are all revolving around trying to make some changes to that process. Senate File 1232, Senator Wickland has a bill that would start to make some changes to the modernization process, most notably moving away from utilizing the NARA, which is the National Association of Regulatory Agencies. So kind of one of the criticisms of the earlier drafts has been that it was too reliant on national best practices that were deemed unrealistic by many providers. So there are other changes in that bill, but it would start to move towards something more of a compromise with some of the concerns of the community. And then Representative Coulter is carrying a House version. Senator Hochschild is carrying a Senate version of the bill. House File 2617, Senate File 2135. And these are both same bill with a new amendment added that really starts to envision this licensing modernization process in a very different way. And it would move away from, basically, it would create an expectation that the role of the state is at that most basic health and safety level, but the rest of what is deemed part of licensure now, or certainly what is considered quality, would be handled more through external entities that are either accreditations or other types of national organizations that are provider and educator informed. So if those of you who are familiar with Power to the Profession and some of the other movements, this is actually a particular movement called We Vision. But it's the idea of, as I say, moving away, honoring the professionalism and the education and training of our teachers and making licensing much more basic around health and safety. So I've heard it described as the beginning of a conversation. And since any of the regulation modernization work is likely not to show up until next session, this is introducing that concept so that those conversations can be had. Phew, a lot went on last week. And as I've mentioned at the top, we have another very, very full week in order for bills to continue. They need to be heard in both the House and the Senate committees to which they were referred by Friday, April 4th. So we may be switching to a written update next week just to get you through all of those. And then once again, the following week up through Friday, April 11th is when the departments will put together those sort of massive omnibus budget bills. So that will certainly also bring a written update. For now, though, that's what happened this week. Tune in if you want to. We can always add the link to the legislative homepage, and you can monitor any of the hearings that you see on there. And of course, please go to our website for our bill tracker to read more in depth on any of the bills that I've talked about today. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.